Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the final session of In Focus DevOps Week. My name is Jenny Ouyang, Principal Technical Enablement Architect, and I am joining you once again from San Francisco, California. For our final session of the week, I am personally excited for James to show some of the cool things you can do on GitHub that can help you with improving DevOps. Yesterday, we showed our unique DevOps journeys, the motivations for making the change, the tools that got us here, and the differences that we see. Today, we'll get hands-on support for code-to-cloud automation. We'll give you an overview of GitHub Enterprise, plus how you can build, deploy, and secure your applications using GitHub Actions, packages, and GitHub security alerts. Today is the day we showcase GitHub's offerings and capabilities and how they may help you in your DevOps journey. James' demo includes many of the tools and processes that we rely on internally at GitHub, so it's a wonderful continuation of our previous sessions and a great way to wrap up the week. Here are some housekeeping items before we get started. We love our time together today to be as interactive as possible, so please chime in on the chat with your insights, color commentary, and reactions to what you're hearing and learning. Your energy and contribution here are needed and much appreciated. If you have a question, be sure to drop it in the Q&A tab on your right. But keep an eye on chat, as we will be hoping to answer the questions in chat live wherever possible. Remember that you can also upvote questions in Q&A so we can reduce redundancy as needed. If at any time you'd like to have a deeper dive on all things GitHub, just click on the purple button on the top right of your screen, and we will reach out to schedule a meeting. Here are some tips on optimal viewing experience. Be sure to join us from your desktop. We recommend using Chrome, Safari, and the latest version of Firefox. If you aren't able to see the stream, please try refreshing the page. And additionally, please disable any VPNs or ad blocking software during the session, as they may also impact the stream quality. If you need help troubleshooting issues on the platform, please navigate over to the Docs tab on the far right and select the Help document or email our partner Goldcast with any support questions. Now, the exciting part. Let me introduce our speaker and moderator for today. James Haw has spent the last 5 years working on empowering people through technology. This has involved taking on roles in app dev, QA, project management consulting, and most recently, solutions engineering here at GitHub. The favorite part of his job is picking up new skills in the ever-growing tech landscape, as you can see how well-versed he is in everything during the demo later. And when he's not debugging a new project, James can be found playing Rocket League and trying out recipes in the kitchen. He's currently trying to learn more Vietnamese dishes and recipes from his family. Shika Thacker, our moderator for the day. Shika has been at GitHub since 2015, a long-time hubber, working with developers and some of our largest customers in the Northeast and Central regions. Shika has been a well-trusted colleague because her passion to help people really shines through in this role, whether it's helping customers solve problems or walking a coworker, such as myself, through a tough challenge. She recently had an adorable baby boy, so that's been taking the time that she used to spend on reading and cooking. Now she's becoming an excellent performer in singing Baby Shark and sneaking in naps wherever possible. Before we get started, here's another reminder for folks to use the Q&A and chat features throughout the presentation, as we will be closely monitoring those channels. Before I hand things off to James, I gotta ask, James, what's your favorite recipe at the moment, and what would you recommend to folks in the audience? James?
Great question, Jenny. Right now, favorite recipe to try is actually bún bò. If you've ever tried before, very familiar Vietnamese noodle dish, kind of similar to pho, but a bit of a spicy kick.
Ooh.
So definitely recommend you go out there, but still trying to perfect that pho recipe that mom makes. Getting a little bit closer, but it's never quite as good.
You're gonna have to share that recipe with me later.
Will do. All right.
Take it away.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Jenny, and thanks everyone for joining us today. We're going to be looking at GitHub Enterprise and how you can empower your developers through automation, including CI/CD, chat ops, infrastructure as code, and security. So please be as interactive as possible. We'll have some questions actually as well for y'all to help us drive our demo in different directions. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and let's get started. All right, so I'm currently sharing my screen and we're going to be looking at this GitHub repository from the lens of a developer. We're starting a new project, a simple Node.js app that we want to deploy out there. How can we use Terraform? How can we use different containerization technologies and actually deploy this up to our cloud of choice today is Azure. So to get started, this is a really simple GitHub repository we're all familiar with, but we're actually going to look at a couple of features that have been recently announced and you may not have played around with just yet. So normally I would actually go to my code tab here, I would git clone, grab this on my machine, open up VS Code. Instead, we're actually going to be today using VS Code Spaces with GitHub. So I'm going to go ahead and open up in a new tab. And this is actually going to take me to this Code Spaces area. So what GitHub Code Spaces is, for any of you that are not too familiar, this is containerizing your deployment environment and running this from your browser. As you can see here, it's actually opening in a specific browser URL. And the great thing about this is we are trying to get away from that problem that I'm sure many of us have encountered. It works on my machine, but not yours. Or I'm using the wrong framework or wrong version of Python for some reason, but I'm not sure. So instead, take all of those components of development we normally use in this very familiar VS Code view and just bring that to your developers and you guys can reuse these components over and over again. So right here, it's very similar to a VS Code experience, including our marketplace, our extensions, our debugging tools. One important thing to note, you can actually customize your code spaces environment using this concept of a dev container. So these are all specific to the repositories themselves and available to your team members. So we can all get started, all of the same foundational frameworks, libraries, packages, permissions, settings for our project. That way everyone can hit the ground running and no longer be wasting time trying to get the infrastructure set up. So if you look in this dev container area, we're actually using a Docker file to go install some different components. I actually wanted to use Zesh as my terminal command. And in here in the dev container.json, you can see we actually decided to set up some additional settings. These are all optional, and you actually don't even need to use a dev container if you would not like to. You can actually get started with a default GitHub Code Spaces. But here I'm actually running a couple of things. I'm using that Docker file that I stated earlier. I'm defining some of my base terminals and shells, as well as some additional extensions I want VS Code to go install from me, especially with Terraform and with Docker. Here I'm also forwarding specific ports out that I want to use because we're actually going to be able to develop this just as we would on our local machine and actually test this live. All right, so with the Code Spaces environment in place and kind of a quick overview of that, let's actually look at this project. So over here in my repository, I'm doing a few different things. So inside the source here, you're going to see a Node.js application. And if I run my terminal commands, I'm just going to go into that repo, go ahead and run my npm test. Let's make sure everything here is working right. You can see it's going ahead and using Mocha. And all right, looks like my test passed. So we're going to look at the contents of this project and then deploy it up back into our GitHub repository in a new branch. So I'm going to quickly do first is let me actually go ahead and check out my main branch. And let's actually create a new branch for us. So we're actually going to create a branch today for our In Focus series. All right, so we're on a new branch. And now we're actually going to take a look at what our project looks like. And maybe there's something we can improve. All right, so npm is just ran, and it's actually forwarding my environment up into this port. So let's go ahead and click this link. All right, we see we're connecting us to this forwarded port, just as I would for my local machine to my browser, but instead it's all being handled in the context of this containerized Code Spaces environment. So it's a really simple Node.js app. It's going to allow me an ability to search for GitHub user handles so I can build out my team of developers. It's kind of lightweight at this point in time, nothing too fancy. So I actually want to add some additional functionality to it. So firstly, let's go back here to my Code Spaces. Let's go ahead and modify this. So under my views, let's actually add some more content here. A nice little header to our main page. Go and add this section here I had previously commented out for nice books. And this is actually a question I have for the poll audience today. So we're going to actually change the background image for our homepage. Let us know which one you would like to see. So I'm actually having 4 options here. One's going to be our cafe. One's going to be a keyboard, nature, and office. So as people are taking out the poll and filling it in, we'll go through the rest of this and we'll decide by democracy which one we should use as our main homepage. All right, go ahead and look at the remainder of my code space while we fill out that poll. We're also going to be using Terraform in this instance for deploying this environment. So for you familiar with Terraform, here we're defining a main TF. We have two versions of it actually, because I actually want to use Terraform state in some situations, and some situations I may not. It may just be kind of a one-off build. Definitely not a best practice. You want to maintain state with your different Terraform providers and environments, but I want to give my team flexibility in what kind of testing rigs they want to send up. So very familiar with Terraform. We're just setting up provider, an app service name. We're going to be creating this in Azure using the Azure provider itself. And then down here, we're actually going to be creating some Azure service plans. We're actually going to be creating some for a couple different resources for a staging and a UAT slot as well. That's going to allow some flexibility, as well as setting up some settings and actually setting up some different Azure policies. All right, going back and looking at our poll, going to close it. It looks like everyone would like to look at nature today, won by a pretty heavy margin, 72%. So let's go and add that to our homepage. I'm sure everyone is as tired as I am of the lockdown and probably like to get out in the wilderness when we can. All right, so we've just saved some changes here locally. In regard to code spaces, let's go back. And all right, this is looking nice. We've modified. We had this nice little section of some of our favorite books, including some books written by a new GitHub member here, Nicole Forsgren, PhD, author of Accelerate, and came to us, and she's actually the founder of Door as well. So really happy to have her on our team. Let me just make sure things are still working. Searching for our CEO, Nat Friedman. All right. And this is actually a picture of the Atlanta skyline where I live and am based out of. Okay, so these changes look great. Let's go and just run our test here and make sure things are good. All right, and there's one more thing I want to do. I'm actually going to install a specific package, and we're actually going to see what happens when we install something that maybe we didn't know about, or maybe a previous branch we were using was out of date in some senses, and there might be a vulnerability known to us. So we're going to see later on in our demo how we can secure and ensure that we're not putting anything to our code base we shouldn't and get us in trouble. All right, so we've walked through some components of the repository here. Let's go ahead and commit these changes. I'm going to go ahead and push this up as well. There we go, make sure I push this to our upstream origin. All right, so that should be set up there now. Now, switching context back to our repository here in GitHub, we can first see, hey, those changes actually just got pushed less than a minute ago. Pretty snappy. And that makes sense, right? We were already connected to our repository. So the fact that we were able to develop here in code spaces and get things reflected right away in GitHub is a huge win. I'm not even opening anything else besides this browser that you see right here. All right, so we have our new changes there. That's great, but the problem is, all right, we need to set up a test environment, and I need to make sure it has the right settings or parameters or permissions around it. How do we get there? We need to reach out to a different team. So instead of going through a bunch of different hoops and possible troubleshooting, let's all keep that in the context of this repository where your developers are already working. So I'm actually going to go over here to my Issues tab, and I'm actually going to go ahead and open a new issue using what we call GitHub issue templates. So these issue templates are great. You can have one or multiple in here. They can be things such as, hey, this is a issue template for whenever there's a feature request or a bug or an issue. We have one in here for a Terraform request to make an Azure app service. So let's go ahead and click this Get Started button and fill out this required information. So over here, I'm actually going to just add some additional information here. And what exactly do I need to fill out for this to be approved and for me to get going with our deployment? So right here, we have a JSON body where we're asking users to fill out the requested information. This includes the name of the team requesting this, the name of the app service itself that wants to be deployed, a couple of Azure-specific criteria, including location where there should be, the type of VM sizes for the web apps, as well as whether or not we want to use the Terraform state. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to go and fill out this material. I'm going to give it my app. Nice colorful name. Let's go ahead and use that Terraform cloud state because we definitely want to show the power of automation with GitHub and the community around it, including different ecosystem partners. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and submit this new issue. All right, so that's in here, but nothing's really happened yet. Let's just confirm that. So let's go to our Actions tab. We can see Nothing's run recently at all. So just because I made this doesn't mean necessarily that's going to be triggered off of an issue creation. It could be if you've experimented with GitHub Actions before, because they have that flexibility. But what we're going to trigger this off of is actually an approval. So you can see my issue template also automatically assigned this to my moderator, Shika. And I'm actually going to go over to our Teams chat over here. And you can see, one, we're using the Teams integration with GitHub. So I'm subscribing to different GitHub events, and they're showing up in here, including a new issue being created. And two, you can actually see that Shika herself went here and commented an approval message for me, /approved. And if we go back to GitHub, we can actually see that reflected. Awesome. Thanks so much, Shika. So now this is actually going to allow us to trigger this Terraform deployment. So once again, Shika deployed this and made this comment right from GitHub using a version of chat ops. Okay, so going over to my GitHub action, we can see that a new action just kicked off. So this Terraform deployment has just initiated, and it's going to go through a couple different steps. This pane here is a workflow visualization of different jobs and how they're running through our workflow file. And jobs can actually be dependent on other jobs, and this can spider out in a couple different ways that we'll see in a later portion. But while this is running, let's actually take a look at the workflow file itself and kind of talk about some of the logic you have when it comes to GitHub Actions. So firstly here, our GitHub Actions using YAML syntax. And the main thing that we're looking at, this line 2 where it says on issue comment, that was what our trigger was. So that's where I asked GitHub Actions to trigger this whenever someone created an issue comment. Okay, so someone made a comment, that's fine. But what if they commented something else, or what if that applies to every single issue that's ever existing in your repo? No problem. If we go down here to our jobs, we can see we can actually add a job conditional as well. This if statement is where we say, hey, if this job and trigger an event have certain parameters around them, go ahead and approve it. So the first thing we're looking for is that label of Terraform, which we automatically apply to any of those issues. The second is, did the comment body itself include that keyword for /approved, which it did. So since those both approved, this job can continue and kick off running for us. We're using a couple different things here with GitHub Actions. For those who don't have too much experience with it, at a high level, the great part about GitHub Actions is the fact that it can be done for both CI/CD as well as automation, as we're doing here. Then in my steps, because each job is made up of several steps, I'm doing a few things. First, I'm actually checking out the code base itself. This is something you use quite often with GitHub Actions. The second part here is I'm actually using an action written by one of my colleagues in SEs, Peter Murray. So this is a GitHub action that's been custom designed in order to actually parse through the issue body and return those contents to you to use as environment variables. So as you recall, we had that JSON body where we're asking some required information, right? What's the team name? What's the app service name? Location, SKU size, tier, cloud state, etc. So as we provide that information, this is actually taking that content from our event and then provide that here as environment variables. And if I actually go into the live logs of this job, we can see how this got set up. So here I just ran this step, and you can see it actually pulled all that information for me from that GitHub action. One further thing with GitHub Actions is the fact that these actually exist in an open marketplace where multiple people contribute to them. So going over to our GitHub marketplace, you can see here, we have over 7,400 actions available. And these are actions written by, as you can see, many first-party ecosystem providers, as well as the developer community. And the great thing about GitHub Action is it's just a repository, it's just a unit of code. So let me see if I can actually find that action by one of my colleagues here, Peter Murray. There it is, the issue body parser. So this is actually what I referenced inside my repository. And all I had to do was say uses, that name slug, and then that repository slug for this action. If we actually take a look at the source code itself or how that action was written, we can see exactly what's running in our workflow. We can branch this, we can suggest changes, or maybe take this and make our own variation of it. That's the power of the community and the power that really only GitHub can provide with over 56 million users. All right, so we did a couple more things with our actions workflow right here. We're also creating some GitHub environments for us as well. So these environments that we're going to take a look at actually allow us to isolate and reference certain parts of our workflow to reflect maybe different secrets, keys, or requested gates before you can actually merge and push into certain environments. With that, we're actually going to take a look now at the Terraform issue itself that I had approved earlier, thanks to Shika. And you can see that I actually had a couple more steps in my workflow where I had the GitHub action itself make comments for me. because I just want to know, hey, what's the status on the way? Did it pass? Did it fail? Is everything going through? So we can see here, let us know that this passed. It created us a new Azure resource group, app service, and app service name there, as well as telling me, hey, we actually create a couple new environments for you to go ahead and add a secret in there for. Now we're going to transition and look at the Azure resource group itself, add the secrets we need. But in that time, I want to pause and see, are there any questions, Shika, in chat or from our audience that we want to address?
Yeah, there are a couple of really great questions. There was one that came in on the availability of code spaces for everyone. I actually dropped in the beta signup link in chat. So for those that want to access that, feel free to go through chat and grab it. And then there were a couple of other interesting questions. So there was one about how do you interface with things like ServiceNow with an action? Mitch was saying, that he doesn't see his security team being able to allowing people to spin things up from GitHub Actions directly.
Great question, Mitch and team. And I think this is actually a great time to talk about how GitHub Actions works and where these jobs are actually running. We let it just magically go out there and it ran for us. But of course, that's running some sort of infrastructure. So with GitHub Actions, you have the option right now to use what we call two sorts of runners. The GitHub hosted runners. These are machines in our cloud that you're available to use and run with. They run on 3 different operating systems you can choose. So Ubuntu, Windows, and Mac. So that's your option if you'd like to. And if you'd like to run your workflows on your own machines, that's what we call GitHub self-hosted runners. So those self-hosted runners are machines that you own. They can be inside your infrastructure, inside a cloud of choice. Doesn't matter to us. They're just being pulled out and receiving jobs from GitHub when available, and they'll run those machines. So if that's how you need to interface with different systems, that's probably an option as well. I believe, was it Mitch, you said, Shika, that asked that question?
That's correct.
All right.
Yep.
Yeah. So Mitch, I'll definitely look at that, as well as maybe any GitHub app integrations that may be available for ServiceNow or any other tools you are using. GitHub apps are a great first-party way to integrate inside GitHub, provide permissions, use webhooks, and communicate with the GitHub services and your external third-party services as well. I think I've seen a couple for, not sure ServiceNow, but I believe there are some ServiceNow options. Just taking a quick look here. We'll see how risky this is. All right, I actually do see that ServiceNow published a couple actions. So definitely recommend looking at Marketplace for this, or really any solution you are looking for. And hey, maybe we can actually use your help in building some more.
I dropped a link to the ServiceNow actions in chat as well.
Thank you so much, Shika. I appreciate that. All right, no, great questions, and we'll definitely have time for some more here. Let's actually look at what happened during that process of our Terraform environment being created. All right, so we saw this GitHub action ran. We saw all green, but let's make sure what happened actually did. So I go over here to my Azure portal. I'm actually going to refresh this, and let me make sure that my resources have shown up. All right, there we go. We see our In Focus series resource group, which is a name that we specified earlier. We can see this was actually created with 2 different deployment slots here for UAT and staging, what we needed. And let's actually make sure those Azure policies that we applied and specified in Terraform also showed up here, which I am also seeing. We have these Azure policies available. Great. So something we need in order to actually deploy to our UAT and to our staging environment. And that's going to be our publish profile. So high level in Azure Web Apps, you're able to have this concept of a publish profile. It's basically just a credential entry that you can use with GitHub Actions or other services, I believe, or API calls, and actually send your workload, your containerized image up here and be published into your app service. So I'm actually going to go ahead and get this publish profile. It's going to open up for me. So I'm going to grab this key, and then we're actually going to update this for our UAT GitHub secret environment. So going back to our repo here, let's actually look at our settings tab. And let's talk quickly about what these secrets are that exist in the context of your repository. So with GitHub Actions and automation and really any CI/CD platform, we're going to need to use secrets for a lot of components, right? API keys, tokens. But we always want to make sure that those are secure, they're not in plain text, they're not exposed in the log. I believe log exposure of secrets is a pretty high attack vector a lot of times, at least for internal possible leakages. So that's why we have GitHub secrets. When we create a secret that is scoped, it's hidden, and it's available to be referenced in other repositories. And we have actually 3 layers of secrets if you think about it. So the first one is a repository secret. These are secrets that are scoped to my repository. They're available for any job in my repo to actually use and reference in a workflow run. The next level we have is what we call organizational level secrets. Maybe you as an organization manager of GitHub Enterprise need to manage these at scale. You want to roll these keys at the top level. No worries, you can do so. Here you can see I'm at my organization account level. And here I can make a new organization secret. And what does that mean? That means this is a secret. This is a value that I can enter. And then I can actually specify who has access to this. Is it all the users inside my enterprise, only certain types of repos, or maybe specific repos that I want to select from a dropdown list? You have that flexibility to control and manage these at that level. So the third level of secrets we have, and actually just got added from GitHub Universe for this new feature called environments, are environment secrets. So here we can see that we have different environments and different secrets for those environments. So the great thing about this is that any secret scope to an environment can only be used in a workflow run for that environment. I know I just said environment a lot of times, but I promise we'll look at the workflow and it'll kind of make sense. Just think about this as protecting and gating any secrets or keys to go where they need to go. So firstly, I need to add my UAT key for my UAT environment. So going over here for my InFocus series UAT environment, I'm going to go ahead and add a new secret. Let me go ahead and put in this value real quick that got from Azure. All right, great. This is configured. This is available to use. Next, I'm actually going to go to my staging environment. And as part of some of my automation, I create a staging environment. But you can see this actually has a few different protection rules than my previous one did. You can see here, the InFocus UAT had no note of a protection rule, and staging has 2. So protection rules are a great way to use for manual approvals or timeouts, or perhaps branches that can only be deployed to for certain environments. So here we went ahead and assigned this to a GitHub team. So this team has to actually approve this before the workflow run can proceed any further. And actually also built in a wait timer as well. It's measured in minutes. So, hey, I want to wait at least a couple minutes or maybe a couple hours before we make this deployment for if we have any internal processes, or we just know that this job sometimes can take a few minutes to deploy up there. So down here, let me go ahead and add a secret for the staging environment. Let me actually go ahead and grab that from my Azure resource group. Look at the staging app service that was created. Let me actually get this published profile. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the published profile for my staging environment. And let me go ahead and enter that here. All right. Okay, so we have our secrets here configured. We have everything that's been deployed up to Azure. Let me actually, though, check with that Terraform state I was speaking about earlier. So we decided to use that. So what does that actually look like? Going over here to Terraform, we can see that I have this workspace in Terraform. So this workspace is going to be where I reference any runs of this job to, and where the state of it is going to be modified, it's going to grow, it's going to evolve. You can see here we had a trigger earlier 10 minutes ago. I believe that lines up with when we started. And we can see that it actually added in a couple of values and keys for us, and showing us what exactly in Terraform changed and actually was modified in this version. So this is now stored for us here. So if we make any additional changes linked up using a Terraform token value that I have, it's going to be reflected in here as well. Okay, so transitioning back to GitHub. We looked at setting this up. So great, I developed my solution, right, in code space. I made a new branch, add some new changes, added a new package. I went ahead and requested for an environment to be deployed and created. Shika was nice enough to give me an approval via Teams. Actually, let me go ahead and like her message. And now we actually want to, hey, go ahead and merge this into our main branch and see and test out these in a safe environment. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to go ahead and create a pull request. So I'm using pull request templates as well, very similar to issue templates as it's all markdown. And I just want to have a sort of defined way when someone makes a pull request to let me know what's going on in it. So the first one is, hey, what are the changes in here? So let's go let them know. And then down here, any related issues to this? And it's one of my favorite features is the fact that you can actually @mention and find and search for other issues simply by doing the pound symbol and looking for any available issues here with GitHub. So it looks like that's correct. I'm actually going to enter the request number for that Terraform issue I made earlier, right? Because that's where it's going to reference, what environments to push to and all that. Let's go ahead and create a PR. All right, so our pull review has been created, and actually a lot of goodness has happened here. Some things I'm sure many people are familiar with GitHub, but just as a quick recap of available features, the first one is this concept of reviewers has been applied. But you saw this was actually applied automatically. And if you hover over here, it's actually applied because this team, GitHub Platform Reviewers, is a code owner. That means that we've defined inside of our project that they actually have to be the ones to approve any changes made to views and files within this repository. So that's what we're using here with this GitHub code owners file that lives in our repo. As well as here, you can see I've also defined that a YAML files changed should belong to me. So this is great because this is an automatic way to make sure that someone is added as a reviewer and that files have to be reviewed by someone that's approved to before someone's proposing changes, maybe to specific folder structures, folder types. It gives you a way to really manage, especially larger repositories at times. So that's the first thing that's been initiated there for us. Scrolling down here, we can also see that we have a couple of these status checks that are running through right now. And you can see a couple of them are actually required. And these actually have to pass before we can merge this pull request. So these are through the GitHub branch protections settings that I'm sure some of you played around with. But just real quickly, if you go to the settings of any repo, you go to branches, there's an option for branch protection rules where you can add a new one. And when it says branch name pattern, the great thing about this is this can be a pattern match. So it could be dev-star. So any regex match to branches that match specific name conventions you have. So every dev branch or feature branch or your main branch always has to go through and be protected by these rules. And a few things I've set up, right? I've said, hey, we need at least one approve and review. You can have up to 6. Let's make sure we dismiss any approvals when there are new commits because that's no longer valid if the code base has changed. Let's make sure we have code review from our code owners. And here's the status checks. So it says looking for any status checks that have run against your repository. And you can actually use and say, hey, this code QL one, for example, or this analyze JavaScript, or these build and test, these are required before we can actually deploy our environment and merge our pull request. And I did mention something here called code QL and analyze. Those are part of GitHub Advanced Security that we'll look at real quickly at the end of this demo. So bear with us there because that security part is definitely exciting. All right. So that's what we did inside of our pull requests. We had those different branch protections. Let's actually look at the PR itself and some of the changes being made. So I can go over here. I can see here's the action build itself natively from my pull request, or I can actually go here to the actions tab and take a look at what's being generated as well. So here we can see this workflow is kicked off from our pull request. It's actually ran through what we call a matrix build. So it ran through 3 different versions of Node that I specified it to test. And here's where we can see the relationship between each of these. So these 2 jobs were actually able to run at the same time. There was no codependence on each other. And the subsequent jobs here, you can see were dependent on these prior 2 jobs for actually passing. That's what we see when we see this blue highlighted line. And the jobs further down the line are actually also dependent as well on the previous job. So let's actually show that workflow file. And here we can see we're using our trigger, in this case, a very traditional one for a pull request on a specific branch. And down here, we have my different jobs. I'm once again extracting that issue number that I specified. So issue number 85 for my repo. I'm gonna go ahead and check out my code. I'm setting up any additional parameters or values that I needed. And then down here, here's what I'm doing that build and test with a matrix strategy is what we call it. So think about multiple environments, multiple versions of a language, or really anything you need to have that sort of sprawled out matrix delivery inside of your GitHub Actions workflows. Here I'm going down, I'm actually building and making sure this all works. And then I'm actually pushing and deploying this image into the GitHub container registry. So I'm using this Docker action that's available out there. And I'm actually logging into the GitHub container registry to store this instead of the Docker container registry or Azure container registry, which you could definitely use as part of your workflow. But I just want to show additional native functionality that GitHub has. And then down here, we can see we have our UAT deployment job that's currently running. And what's going on here is we're actually using that Azure Web Apps deployment, GitHub action. We're using this published profile that was defined in our secret store earlier that we filled in. And then we're actually deploying to that specific slot UAT. And right here, I have a check. I just wanted to make sure that the URL for this is actually live and working before the job finishes and passes. So while that runs, let's actually go ahead and take a look at GitHub packages and actually take a look at the different container registries that occur in our organization level and that I can actually manage. So going back here one level. With GitHub repository, you have the ability to manage packages and now container registry images that's currently in beta from a GitHub repo and actually share that out across your organization. So I'm going to click this package itself. It takes me to my organization level because that's where it's stored and managed. And the great thing about this is you can see, hey, how has this been used? How are people downloading this? How's this going around inside of your enterprise or organization? We can also see the related repo to it, where it's originated from, as well as modify settings if we'd like to. So if we want to say, specific people or teams should have access to this, we can say so. We can give them specific roles as well. And then we can, of course, change the visibility of this if we want to ever make this public for any open source projects we're working on. And we can manage the different versions of this that exist. And we can see how often this has occurred inside of our repo and how we're using it. So we can trace back the state of different deployments from not only our workflow runs, from not only the issues we created, the Terraform instances, now also the container image, all from that kind of native GitHub flow, that native GitHub experience. While this action workflow is running, Shika, are there any questions from chat? I know we just went through a lot, but definitely want to get to any questions that have been put out there.
Yeah, actually, we have one related to what you were just showing. So Bill actually wants to know, is there a more visual approach to creating CI/CD workflows?
Great question. So it depends on the sort of, I guess, CI/CD workflow you'd like in automation. Through GitHub Actions today, it really is a YAML approach. And when I say that, it's that YAML syntax. It's this workflow file itself that you create. A couple nice things about it is the fact that it's readable, it's repeatable, it's versioned as code. I think that's why a lot of tools are going this way instead of the sort of drag and build editor familiar to some tools, including Azure DevOps. I know some of their initial versions of their pipelines use a similar model. So while GitHub Actions has to be built using that code model, there are a couple tools along the way that kind of help you get started. So let's take a look at how you do that. So for one, there's actually a sense of IntelliSense inside of a GitHub action. And actually, let me show you a live file for that. So as you're walking through, as you're making modifications and changes, we try to give you little tips, especially for many reusable patterns that you may be using. For example, here we have different branches available. You might do a push. You should see, it gives you some additional information letting you know, hey, this mapping's not correct or something's not going on right. In addition to that, you can actually also see the marketplace view, letting you know, hey, there are different actions you might actually want to use and put inside of this GitHub repository. You can quickly see from this left-hand reference, as you're looking through the marketplace, you can quickly use this code snippet and place it into your repository. So while there's no fully visual method of building action, I think there are some additional functionality, the plug and play method with our GitHub Actions components and our starter templates team in order to make sure that you can hit the ground running as quickly as possible. Great question, Shika.
Awesome. We did have another question as well from Louise. He wanted to know, is there a hybrid model for actions between GitHub and on-prem? So GitHub.com and on-prem.
Yeah, no, great question there. And Shika, would you mind actually getting the documentation on self-hosted runners? If you didn't already, I'm sure you did, and put that available for chat. I'm not sure if you were available earlier, but we did talk about GitHub Actions. You can run them in the cloud, of course, of our cloud hosted runners. That's what we're doing right here. So those are available to us. I don't have to manage the infrastructure, which is great. I love getting out of that space. But if you need to, there is also the option to use what we call GitHub self-hosted runners. So what a self-hosted runner is just a machine that you have either on premises in your infrastructure, and you can add our self-hosted runner software to it, where we'll actually download this runner package, install, and actually communicate up to GitHub with a certain token or key. And once that's available, you can actually use this in order to connect your jobs down to GitHub Enterprise. So any workflow job that you're running, you can put a specific tag to go to a self-hosted runner, and now that's available for you. You don't have to use our cloud hosted runners. You can manage that infrastructure, or if you need to get inside of your network, that's an option too. Great question.
Awesome. And then we did also have a question stream in from LinkedIn. Suba wanted to know, what would you say is the biggest difference and value proposition for GitHub Actions, in your opinion? So I'll let you answer, and then I can also give my opinion.
Please, yeah, please. That sounds great. I think that's right here. It's the fact that you have this incredible community of not just developers, not just ecosystem partners, but really people that want to make the platform better. And that's how we've gone to, I could have sworn it was 7,441 earlier. So I think it might have just live changed this. Maybe we'll go back to the recording and see. But this is always continuously growing and improving. All these major companies realize that, hey, the developer community, the organizations, the Fortune 500 especially, they are using GitHub or GitHub Enterprise. We want to be closer to them. We want to be where the developers are and where that they're actually using our platforms and make it as easy as possible for them to use and consume our services. So that's the first part of it. That's always growing. It's always getting better. The second part is the fact that just for little things that maybe you didn't even realize could be a nice quality of life improvement, you can find that out there. Just for example here, let's see, it looks like someone built this action for using checkoff for checking out infrastructure as code repositories using Terraform and CloudFormation. There's so many little neat additional value adds and just quality of life improvements to developers and teams. I think that's where GitHub Action really shines. And I think one big part of it too is the fact that it's not just CI/CD. If you think about GitHub Actions for CI/CD, I would say you're limiting the possibilities that you have as a team, as an organization. GitHub Actions for automation, for collaboration, that is something that can be really taken advantage of on our platform because you're doing everything there natively in a lot of senses. You're closing issues, you're opening things, you're having pull requests, you're having conversation. And as you can see, we have a lot of different actions that are around things like closing stale issues, for example, or sending notification when a team maybe has changed. So to me, Shika, those are some of my biggest value adds of GitHub Actions. What about you though?
I'd have to agree with everything you said. I think the two key words that come to mind are flexible. So GitHub Actions are extremely flexible. So you can really sort of like do anything that you want to automate, you can do with GitHub Actions, which is pretty cool, and seamless. So the nice thing is that everything is right there where the developers are in and day out. And that's where your workflow files live. And that's where you can see the results of those actions and those workflows. And so it's just a really, really great experience all around.
Definitely agree. A great question, great insight. All right, let's take a pause on those and we'll definitely get back to anything. Really appreciate it. Keep them coming though. We actually want to look at now the GitHub Action run and some deployment things that have just occurred. So I'm actually going to go back here to my GitHub Action workflow run. And here is the visual component of it. It's not being built visually, but it at least is showing you, hey, how does this workflow actually map? How are all these jobs related? How are things coming through? So I can zoom in slightly. We can see, as I said earlier, hey, we can see the matrix build started. You went ahead and pushed the latest version of that container up to your container registry. Okay. We actually reference that container registry when we publish that job. And here, my favorite part is the fact that we're using an environment. It actually is hyperlinking this URL for us. So this is actually what we can go in and say, hey, Shika, I've actually just finished our deployment of UAT. Can you make sure the site's up and running? Share with my coworkers, my colleagues, and make sure we're on the same page about this. So we can see that this page has been deployed. It's now on a live Azure website. And let me see, maybe I won't get in too much trouble sharing this if people want to see it live. Put it in chat there. So this is available, and I can actually search for some different people's handles to confirm that. So Shika, I'm going to pick on you. All right, your profile is coming back. Looks good. And looks like all these books we wanted to add earlier are there as well. So we've deployed up to our UAT environment. Do you recall earlier when we looked at environments, we did add a sort of staging and gating component to it. So we said, hey, it actually has required reviewers, and there actually is a time frame before someone can deploy here. So right here, it's saying that we're requesting a review from someone, myself, but actually also my colleague, Shika. So Shika, would you mind actually going in there and approving this review so we can see what that looks like?
Looks good to me, James. You're approved.
Awesome. I see it right there. Great. So Shika did that for us. It says as an event that she approved this environment staging, and that was her comment, LGTM. All right. So the fact that she just deployed that, I love it. We see it live that now that job is kicking off. Now it's running. It's going to go through these build steps and actually deploy it up to our staging environment for us. So we don't have to watch that sausage being made, but it's great to see that we're able to gate and protect our environments in this sort of fashion. So we looked at a few things so far, right? We looked at a developer changing, making changes on their code base inside code spaces. We saw deploying the infrastructure as code from chat ops using Teams and a GitHub issue. And now we saw the pull request actually run our CI/CD automation. One thing about the pull request, though, that has some additional annotations and updates for us that lets us actually track what's going on. So if we scroll here, you can see it's telling us that there's actually the branch is being deployed to an environment. So here it's actually linking up and showing those GitHub environments that we're defining. And it's showing us that, hey, these are actually being deployed. This is the state of this one. You can actually take a look and a view at where that is. So the way this works is the fact that inside of our GitHub Action workflow file, we define our environments in these different sections down here. So here I'm saying for this job, Azure deployment to UAT, I have this environment keyword now that's available where I say what's the name of the environment and what's the URL that's going to serve up. The URL part is optional, and perhaps that isn't applicable to some projects, but for some it may be, right? It's going somewhere internally, or here's a reference, or here's where the package was deployed if you want to take a look at it. So you can parameterize and use this information. And that name we're defining on the fly is actually great because we're then referencing that issue we created earlier. So we're building some variability in here that can actually be reused across our team, and perhaps other teams can take advantage of it as well. Scrolling down here, it looks like all of our different status checks have actually passed, which is great. I'm actually looking at this scan, and it looks like what we needed to has gone up. So one thing that I did want to check on is the fact that we also have these two components here, right, for security and code QL analysis. So we're going to jump over and look at the security side of things. But let's actually, if we can, confirm that our staging environment has also been deployed. So here we can see staging. It's showing green. Let's click this deployment. All right, great. We can see staging is up and it's also running. And let's just verify this site works. And there it is. Our great host, Jenny, is showing up there for us. Okay. So now we're going to pivot over and talk about what security means with GitHub Enterprise and some additional options capabilities you have. The first one, in keeping with GitHub Enterprise itself, I want to look at is this idea of securing our open source components. 80 to 90% of new applications built either by developers or enterprises are using open source software. It makes sense. It's free, cheap in most situations. It's readily available, and it gets us where we need to go. We can focus on our value differentiators as a company, as a team, to be productive. We don't have to reinvent the wheel constantly. We can just download a package from NPM or wherever it is. One thing about that, though, is how do we make sure the open source components we're using are up to date, aren't vulnerable, and are actually being checked when possible in our life cycle. So we're actually going to take a look at that right now. So the first thing we want to look at is this service on GitHub Enterprise called Dependabot. Many of you are probably familiar with it, but I'm actually going to go ahead and enable Dependabot inside my repo so we can take a look at this. All right, so Dependabot is enabled. Great. Now I'm going back to my home page, and wow, it's actually telling me that there is a vulnerability in one of my dependencies. So let me go in and see these Dependabot alerts. It's letting me know, hey, this dependency, this package, WebSock extensions, is actually vulnerable. We can see here that it's previously a vulnerable version 1.3. If I go down here, I can actually see the known vulnerability alert for it, and it's telling me it's a moderate severity level. This is part of GitHub sort of stewardship, and I believe kind of responsibility to make sure that our community, both open source and our enterprise customers, are secure and using the right things that they're supposed to be. So I go over here and I clicked on that link. It took me to our GitHub Advisor database, which is a free, readily available database that anyone can reference. It has multiple advisory CVEs in it. And now GitHub's actually also an official issuer of CVEs, so we can actually add to this. I think it makes a lot of sense because most of these open source projects live on GitHub. So if there is an issue, it can be reported. Our security team can go in and validate any problems. All right, so we have that information, which is great to know, but how am I actually going to be able to fix this? I don't have time, or you can give me a list of reports, but I'll get to it when I can. Let's take away that onus from our developers and let them just focus on writing good software, and actually go over here to our pull request, and we can see that Dependabot opened up a pull request for us. So when possible, Dependabot's going to create an automated pull request to fix any of these dependencies. And we can see here, we actually see the different commits that Dependabot made in order to resolve this issue and bump us to the next safest version, 0.1.4. I can see here, hey, is it compatible? Did it run? Okay, good. Is it running through any of my CI/CD checks? All right, looks like it didn't fail any of my builds or anything like that. Deployment didn't work, but I believe that's probably because it didn't have the right value, right, to go to that Azure environment. But everything else actually worked. So depending on how we're feeling, we can go and merge this. And just like that, we've shifted security left by fixing any known open source vulnerability. So that's part of the GitHub Enterprise offering that's available, this Dependabot service. I do now want to transition over, though, and talk about GitHub Advanced Security and some of the capabilities available there. So GitHub Advanced Security is an add-on product available for GitHub Enterprise. And what this does is give you actually access to a couple really nifty features. The first one is this idea of secret scanning. I'm not going to ask anyone to raise hands, but maybe some people in chat aren't too shy of who's ever checked in a secret to a public repository. Okay, I'll be the first to admit I have. And what happened was a GitHub token. And the great thing about that situation, there's a nice side, is once I checked that in, I got an alert from GitHub telling me that I checked in a known token of theirs, and they automatically revoked it, which was great because it's not out there. Someone can't take that, expose that, and then take advantage of it and run off a pretty hefty bill if it's for maybe a cloud provider, for instance. We want to take that ability and that infrastructure we have and let you know whenever secrets are occurring within your organization inside of your private repos. So on the security tab, we saw our dependent bot alerts. We also have this section here for code scanning and secret scanning alerts. If I click on secret scanning alerts, you can see it's actually letting me know different secrets from different vendors that have actually checked into my repo. And this is actually very powerful because we're partnering with about 35 plus cloud vendors to understand how are their keys created, their tokens, their strings, their connection strings, and allows us to check and make sure that those are not occurring, those patterns are being exposed inside our users' code bases. And then another great thing, it actually scans through our Git history. So it's not just reliant on the main branch of our repo. If I actually look here, it tells me when did this actually occur in my Git history. If I click on this, I can see it's actually occurred in a branch. It wasn't even on my main branch of my repo. It occurred in a branch someone checked in. It's kind of crazy thinking about the stories. I'm sure Shika, you have some too, of customers that have used advanced security and they found secrets from months or years ago in a lot of situations that have occurred in their code bases. So that's the first part of GitHub Advanced Security, securing your code and making sure you're using a best practice implementation. The second part I want to look at is actually part of the CI/CD scans we saw earlier, which was the code scanning with CodeQL. So you can see here that I had this analyze step run. If I actually look at the details of this, this job itself is actually using our CodeQL technology, where it's actually using CodeQL, which we call our SaaS solution. That's actually scanning our code as data and actually using what we call queries in order to analyze and see the results. You can see here 66 different queries were actually being ran against this repo. And if any vulnerability was found, it would report it and it would actually stop it from running. And you guys should take a look at some of the queries available with CodeQL in our public GitHub repo for CodeQL. It's just github.com/CodeQL. We'll share that link in the chat as well. Securing your open source, or I'm sorry, this securing your code base from known CVEs, OAuth standards, or just best practices in terms of development. These queries are code artifacts, so they're existing out here. And the great part about it, it's an open source repo. So as you can see, we have a couple hundred pull requests available that other community members are trying to add in value for us. There was actually a recent story not too long ago, I think actually this last week, where Microsoft wrote some CodeQL queries in regards to the recent SolarWinds hack. So that's just an example of the different customers of CodeQL adding back value to this to help secure all of us. So it's something that kind of just keeps on growing. And another great part is take these queries, take these artifacts, use them yourself and actually modify them. You can see they're just code, very similar to SQL-like language or object-oriented in nature. And you can actually leverage this in your pipelines with GitHub Advanced Security. And one more feature of GitHub Advanced Security we want to look at is this concept of dependency review. So earlier, Dependabot told me I have a dependency inside my repo. Okay, that was on my main branch that occurred, that existed there. But what if I had dependencies from something that I checked in earlier? Going back to when we were in our GitHub code space, if you do recall, I installed something, a known NPM package, Lodash. You can see here, it was telling me actually that I was using the wrong version, but I'm a bad developer in a lot of ways, and I'll sometimes ignore those, thinking, oh, I'll get to it later. This is the version I need to use based on the information I have. So if we go here to our Files Change tab, where we're quite familiar from the GitHub pull request flow, I'm actually going to click one of this rich diff buttons, and it's actually going to tell me, because I have GitHub Advanced Security, of any dependencies being added in here that have known vulnerabilities. So right there, it's telling us, hey, you're using a Lodash version that has a couple known vulnerabilities and severity levels with them. So this information is right here. It's readily available to me, so we can actually review that during our code review process and make sure, hey, let's actually fix this before we're going to approve this PR. All right, I know we just looked at a lot of information there around security. Shika and team, are there any questions from chat we can address or answer at this point in time?
Yeah. So Casey had a few questions on self-hosted runners. So Casey wanted to know, can self-hosted runners do they work with GitHub Enterprise Cloud?
Great question. Yes, they do. And that's actually what we just saw earlier. Self-hosted runners are completely available for GitHub Enterprise Cloud and GitHub Enterprise Server.
Awesome. And then Matt wanted to know, are environments only scoped to the repo right now?
Great question, Matt. And environments, yes, they are currently scoped to the repository level at this point in time, and that's where they exist. So as part of the repo, not part of the org level. But that might change, and we're actually taking a bunch of customer feedback. So please reach out to our community and let them know your thoughts.
Awesome. And then Bill wanted to get a refresh on how you were going from staging to production. So he asked if you could verbally just describe that process real quick.
Sure. So let's look back at this workflow file and see where we're at with here. So recall that a unit of work inside of a GitHub action, they start as jobs, right? So we have a couple of different jobs in here. So let me just collapse this, maybe a little bit easier to see. So the first job I had was my issue ops job, where I extracted the issue from my pull request and gave me the value that I needed for it. The next was my build and test job, right? Pretty simple one. I'm just testing across different versions of Node. As you can see here, then I'm building and making sure any tests I have run and pass. The second one, I'm using the Docker build and push. So I'm actually containerizing this instance in my pull request. I'm actually then publishing that to my GitHub container registry, as you can see here, using the login from Docker, actually, we're just pointing the registry to the GHCR, GitHub Container Registry. All right, so that job passes. And down here, this is where I begin my job deploying to UAT. So from here, we have our UAT deployment. I'm actually specifying the environment. So I'm saying, hey, this deployment to UAT, so it's only going to use the UAT specific scoped credential for this secret. And this is actually using an Azure Web App deploy function, and it takes in these parameters, right? The name of the web app, you need to know that. The publish profile, which we grabbed from Azure, as well as what image do you want to use. So, hey, we're actually going to use this image from our GitHub Container Registry that we've been tagging with the pull request head and SHA title, as well as, hey, what's the slot name in Azure that you want to deploy this to, which, if you recall, is the UAT deployment slot. And that's how it made its way up into our GitHub repository to our Azure deployment. And then the next part of this is the staging, where we gated. So this staging environment, it actually needs the Azure deployment before it can run. And that's the point where I asked Shika, and she was so kind to, with our environment protections, to actually stop and tell me that, hey, I need to wait 3 minutes and I actually need an approved review from someone on this team. So Matt, I hope that answered your question of that part of the flow. We did also share this repository out, so it is available in an open source repo. So we can try to bring that up to the top of chat for y'all. That's just on my GitHub repository. So you can take a look at these files, any changes as well to the team. All right. Any other questions there, Chica, from chat?
Yes. So let's see. There was a question about GitHub Advanced Security, actually, since we touched on that briefly. I know we have a session dedicated to this next week. So for the person asking that question in their NIL, I would definitely suggest checking out that session. But it looks like he wanted to know, are there any additional steps for GitHub Advanced Security for things like password, looking at secrets that have been checked in? So for like hard-coded passwords or SSH keys, things like that.
Great question. That's a great question with advanced security. So the great benefit of the code QL technology we saw earlier that scan our code as data is those query artifacts, they can actually vary in terms of what they're scanning for. Some are scanning for CVEs, some are scanning for vulnerabilities, and actually some are, now that you're mentioning that, are also scanning for things possibly like that, SSH keys or RSA tokens and such. So let me actually show you a different repository. I think that'd be a great place for us to wrap up and see how this works, is the fact that you can see these results. You can see how the scans themselves are just picking up information about your repo. So here's a different repo I have, but it's actually scanning and it's telling me a couple of things. It's telling me first, hey, we're using hard-coded credentials in here. We probably shouldn't be, right? So an RSA token. Or hey, it looks like there may be a hard-coded value passed inside your repository. This is all actually separate of that secret scanning for connection strings, APIs, and tokens. This is part of that code QL, that code scanning functionality. So there is ability for that. It's going to vary depending on the language, depending on what queries we currently have. But that's where we can actually lean our community and say, hey, are there certain things that y'all want to scan for as well that you want to write a query for? So no, great question and kind of a great additional insight and power into what you can find with advanced security, both known vulnerabilities like zip slip, as well as possible things like best practices not being followed. All right. I know we're coming up on time. I think one thing I did want to show kind of in the vein of automation with what we've been doing so far is, all right, we've finished this. It's been deployed up there. Hopefully someone accepts my pull request, but we actually need to clean up and get done with this environment we had earlier, right? That originated from this Terraform action. So what I'm going to do is, let me see if I can share my screen some. And let's actually look at the GitHub mobile app. I'm not sure if anyone out there has downloaded or used it before. I highly recommend it. It's a great way to see what's going on inside your repositories, issues, review things. But I actually want to take a look at one of my repos right there. I know it might be a little hard to see, but this is the issue from earlier that we had, right? For, issue number 85 right there. So I'm actually going to go down here. And I think I can actually see a bunch of information. And I'm actually going to close this issue from my repo itself, from my app itself. All right, so it looks like it's closed here. And if you just saw it on our browser window, it's also reflected there as it closed. So, all right, closed it from my mobile app. Big deal, right? That's just a simple bit flip. But I'm going to actually go back here to my GitHub action, and we can see a GitHub action just triggered about 10 seconds ago for tearing down these resources, because I want to make this as simple as possible, right? Hey, you requested something great, and now you're done with it. Just go ahead and close the issue, or maybe someone else from the team is going to close the issue, depending on when we want to format this. But what's happened is this workflow file is going to go through, it's going to check, and then it's actually going to use either Terraform or actually an Azure CLI command in order to tear down those resources. All right. So with that, y'all know we are at time. Let's stop screen sharing, and I'm happy to focus on any Q&A questions we have left from the audience. Jenny and Shika.
I think that we've covered most of the questions, actually, so I think we're in good shape.
Excellent.
Awesome.
All right.
James, I think that the demo gods must just love you, because that was such a comprehensive and amazing walkthrough, as with all of your demos.
We got really lucky today. Nothing went wrong. I'm sure for anyone that lives code, yeah.
Oh, you're too humble. I'm so excited that you demoed just how extensible the platform is and how easy it is to use code spaces, add in necessary automation, ease of deployment, secret management, ability to use like pre-built actions without write out anything yourself, and just by picking them out from the marketplace, it just all seems super smooth together, and more importantly, easy to adopt. I just can't wait for everyone in the audience to try things out. And for those that are interested in trying out code spaces, I think Shika has also dropped the beta sign up link in chat, so be sure to check that out. Shika, if you could just paste that link in there again so folks have easy access. Once again, everyone, all session recordings will be available on demand at infocus.github.com as soon as possible. Before we wrap up here, folks, if you like a deeper dive on anything we covered here today, just click the book a meeting button on the top right of your screen, and we will get back to you and set a time up to connect with you. Lastly, please take just a minute or two to complete a very, very short survey about your experience with us. We take rapid iteration very seriously and would love to learn from your feedback to optimize future sessions. And don't be shy, tell us what you think. Great. Let me share my screen really quick. There you go. Looking back at our past week and what we went over, on Tuesday, Jared, James, Jorgen covered what powers a successful DevOps program, the challenges faced in adopting DevOps, and how a unified platform helps to solve these challenges. We covered practical tips, principles, and examples on shared ownership, automation, and rapid feedback. On Wednesday, we heard from Brian Lyles and Jamie Jones on their experiences, very rich experiences, in the industry with a fun and provocative conversation around everything DevOps. Yesterday, our team shared GitHub's unique DevOps journeys and our lessons learned along the way. And next week, we're going to talk about DevSecOps. I know James covered quite a bit about everything security in his demo, so it's a great segue into our next week's sessions. We'll be bringing security to the forefront of the conversation with insights from experts on the topic. We'll talk about why DevSecOps matters for developers and why it's so crucial to keep that developer experience at the heart of security. So be sure to join us next Tuesday for kickoff on all things DevSecOps. And here's a preview as to what to expect. On Tuesday, March 9th, we'll have an enterprise showcase on flipping the script on application security. On Wednesday, we'll be going over lessons learned with Eli Lilly, doing more and staying secure with less. On Thursday, we have a roundtable on going from DevOps to DevSecOps. And last but not least, on Friday, March 12th, we will have a deep dive on achieving DevSecOps with GitHub Advanced Security. I know earlier there was a question around a particular security feature, so be sure to tune in on the Friday session next week. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure being your host for the week. Thank you so much for all of your participation and support this week. Looking forward to seeing y'all again next week. Bye.